Welcome to Fanpale Podcast, where we are unpacking opinions and changing destinations. I am your host, Shirley Altador, where each week we will chat about how to rise strong out of all types of obstacles that come with relationships. Through personal life experiences and discussions ranging from infidelity, trust, forgiveness, sex, heartbreak, self-love, and so much more. I am passionate and obsessed to provide guidance to every woman to create a better life. Let's dive in, pull up a seat, make sure you're cozy, and get ready to be challenged and encouraged while you learn. With me, your virtual girlfriend. Welcome back to another episode of Fanpale Podcast. Today for Storytime, we do have a special guest with us today. We have Lisa. Lisa is also known as the Coach's Coach and is a dynamic, powerful speaker, visionary, and leader. Her unique coaching blend encompasses personal, professional, and spiritual practices. Life-changing messages have provided empowerment to local colleges, universities, conferences, and church groups. Lisa strategically uses global platforms as well to inspire and empower her followers on a national level. Lisa, welcome to the show, and how are you today?
I'm fantastic, Shirley. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate you being here. I appreciate every single one of our guests because it makes a whole difference for anybody who has to hear someone's story from triumph, from tragedy to triumph, because there are people out there that are really, sometimes I feel, best words I can say, going through it and feel like, oh my gosh, my life is ending. But, you know, each person sharing their story is so dynamic. So Lisa, thank you for being on this show.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you want to add to your bio and let people know, in addition of what I said, who you are, what you do?
Absolutely. So I am Lisa Santiago McNeil, and I do believe that each and every one of us are more powerful when we tell our story versus having that story told by someone else, because we get to share it from the vantage point of our own ownership, our own acceptance, and also from the side of, like you said, triumph. Because if you hadn't triumphed, you wouldn't be here to tell that story,
Exactly.
right? It's so important, I think, even just hearing historically from some people who talk about history, right? History being history. So much of what has even added to the oppression of all of us historically has been the fact that someone else is telling the story from their perspective.
Exactly.
And when they do that, they're going to write themselves in as the hero.
You're absolutely right.
And you know what? Whether or not they realize it, they're not seeing something from your side. And that's why it's so important for us to tell our story.
Absolutely.
Even as I think of where my story began, it wasn't until I began to allow myself to see my own story and then gave myself permission to tell my own story, was I then in a position to take my power from it. Understand, I didn't say take my power back, because we don't lose the power. Sometimes what happens is that we simply don't recognize it. And we have some limiting beliefs associated with what we were told happened and what actually really happened.
Absolutely. You're right. I mean, I know there were times where I had dark days in my life and I questioned not my existence to the point where I wanted to take my life. I couldn't understand why I was even here on this earth, where I was, what was going on, why what was happening to me. You start to question anything and everything. You know, never felt suicidal. So it's not that type of didn't understand my existence. I just felt worthless.
Yeah. And I think that comes from not having someone in the position of authority to remind us that we all have purpose. Whether or not you have discovered your calling is a whole separate thing. But we all have purpose, and our purpose is to serve the world.
Exactly.
And to give God the glory. Like, that's our purpose.
Exactly.
When you see that, you see value and worth in your life. Even if it still becomes, oh, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. You still at least know that I'm supposed to be doing something.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And I think that is so important. to our own personal growth and development, even if you will, our own evolution into our calling, is to first embrace that, yes, we have purpose. And then our calling is the how. How do we implement our purpose?
Absolutely.
The purpose is the what, the calling is the how. We all have heard from Simon Sinek as well that it all starts with why. Yeah. And I think he probably came from at least a background that many of us may not have, that purpose was instinctual. Yeah. Purpose is a part of, just because you exist, you have purpose. And all of us did not have that original story.
Yeah.
All of us did not. At least I did not. I did not have that initial story. From the beginning, it was almost like my purpose was to get out of the way. My purpose was to be as intrusive as possible, because my very existence was out of time, out of place, burden on everybody that came through. And I just couldn't see that there was anything that was purposeful to my existence at that time. And because other people were still operating and finding their callings and dealing with the challenges with accepting their callings, that me being aware of purpose was a bit troublesome, a bit, like, all right, can we get her quiet? Can we get her out of the way? Can we get her, whatever?
Okay. And you're going to share with us today. So you're going to take us back to as far back as you would like, to give us a little deets and insight on your story and how you started.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. And it really does start with that, because I was, I can go back further than most people can in their existence. But one of the first moments for me that was pivotal in creating what I later learned was a limiting belief was at about 2.5, maybe 3 years old, failing at a job that I was sort of set up to do, not intentionally, but my mother at the time was a very young mother, and she was not as attentive as she probably should have been at that moment. I had a younger sibling who was in need of care. They needed to be fed, they needed to be held, they needed to be, tended to. They were a child, they were a baby. They were a little over, I think she was a little over a year old, maybe a year and a half. And at 2.5, I knew that when babies cry, you take care of them. You give them a bottle. They, you rock them or whatever the case was. But there were no adults there who were active to do that. And so I stepped in at 2.5 years old, and I found a bottle, gave it to the child. But unfortunately, the bottle made the baby sick. And so I carried that burden for years and years and years of being not adept, of being someone that caused tragedy, of being, a problem or a burden, instead of realizing, which took years and years of reconciliation, self-reconciliation, that, that 2.5-year-old child was acting like a superhero. How many 2.5-year-old children have the presence of mind to go take care of another person, another human being? So sometimes getting out of alignment with what is going on in your world and not having anybody to help you to understand what really happened, so that you can see it not from history. History was, I gave the child the bottle made the child sick, right? That's history. That's not what happened. What happened was my loving, nurturing self reached out to help in any way that I could. And although I tried to help, it ended up being detrimental to the child.
I understand what you mean. At 2.5, I remember my daughter changing her brother's diaper and wanting to help out because
Absolutely.
it's interesting. And, you know, I'm not no medical professional, so I'm not going to tell you how the brain works, but it's crazy how the brain works. And as people, we are visual learners big time, especially when we're little.
Absolutely.
So I can see you at 2.5, hearing this baby cry and wanting to help this baby.
Absolutely.
So now she got sick. I'm assuming, I guess the milk was spoiled, or was it?
The milk was spoiled.
Okay.
The milk was spoiled. Yeah, the milk was spoiled. So it was not tragic, thank God, right? But there was no one there in that sense with the presence of mind to congratulate that 2-year-old for trying, for thanking her for trying to help, and redirecting her back to a 2.5-year-old activity.
Exactly.
Right? And so what happens is that story then takes on a life of its own. Now what happens, now someone who doesn't have the wherewithal to even have processed what the right answer was at that time is now carrying the burden of processing all the wrong answers. I never know what to do. I'm always hurting people. Your self-worth and your value begins to imprint on that moment in time. And then moving forward, it causes a roadblock, or at least for me, it caused an over exemplification of helpfulness. Because at that time, I had decided, you know what, I'm always going to be helpful. I'm never going to hurt. I'm always going to help. And in turn, not having the balance between sometimes helping others, taking care of yourself, understanding the value of self-care and all those things, caused an unbalanced relationship with the world, with everything. And so I'm not going to take you on a year-by-year journey, but I'm just saying that was the beginning. That was a very integral moment for me. And then because we were sort of in a very difficult childhood, and I'm conscientious when I choose my words, please understand that, because I'm careful to choose to tell only my story. Gotcha. I understand that other people's perspectives may have shaped their historical knowledge differently than the way I remember it. But after that incident, I remember going from person to person, from house to house, not having stability until finally ending up in a place of stability that was tainted with a lack of safety.
Okay.
Right.
So where were your parents? Why were you shifting from home to home?
Well, as I said, I was a child of a very young mother.
Gotcha.
And because of that, she didn't get the help that she needed. And because of her not having the help that she needed, I unfortunately also did not have some of the help and safety that I needed at that time.
Gotcha. Now, were there relatives, the people that you ended up with?
Yeah. So ultimately, after going from house to house, and I don't know whether or not we were going from place to place of relatives or not at that time, I don't really recall, but ended up at the home of my mother's mother's father's mother.
Wait, my mother's father's mother, which would have been, is that your great grandmom on your?
Two greats on my paternal grandfather's side.
Paternal grandfather, because this is your grandmom's father's mother. Got it. I had to break that down.
Yes, gotta break that down. And that in and of itself is relevant as well to my story, because if you think about, there was a tremendous age difference.
Tremendous generational gap.
Yeah, generations upon generations. You know, we're 5 generations removed. Yeah. And so she was very much senior. She was in her 90s by the time she had myself and my sister. And so there was a lot of experiences that even at that time, I didn't quite understand. Looking back on them and having taken them apart and kind of revisited them through a forgiving heart and through a healed heart, I could see that some of them, I don't know if you've heard the saying, was they did the best that they could.
I've heard that. Yes.
Right? You know, they did what they knew, or they did the best that they could. Was a lot of what I had to process my forgiveness through.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that.
But even in that situation where was able to understand that there was love there, and that there was, we weren't just there because there's no other place for us to be, although that was part of it. She did give us love there, but what she did not provide was safety.
Gotcha. Now, is that where the abuse and molestation started?
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay. And do you know who was molesting you?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And how long did that last?
It lasted until I was 12 and a half.
Gotcha. That's what caused you to run away at 13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to just step forward just for a brief moment. Do you still interact, or do you still see your molester to this day?
No, he's
dead. Okay, he's deceased. Okay. Now, before he passed away, did you have to see this person at events? Because I've heard this where, like, if it's a family member, you're encountering them at family events.
So, to an extent and to a degree, from the time that I was about 18 till about 20, I think around 17 to 20, 18 to 20, I still had to see him in passing, see him at my grandmother's house, because once I left, I ran away because I didn't want to hurt him and her to suffer ramifications as a result of me doing something to him, if that makes sense. Like I was angry. I felt that I felt that I wanted to retaliate.
Mm-hmm.
And I also felt like if I retaliated and I'm under 18, then that means that my guardians may have to take ownership of some of this retaliation, was the thought in my mind. And as much as I knew that what he was doing was wrong, I also knew that my grandmother felt some love for him.
Mm-hmm.
And she felt some responsibility for him being the type of predator that he was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt that I would hurt too many people if I actually hurt him. Too many people that didn't deserve the hurt.
So 12 and a half, your brain was positively rationalizing why you should not do harm to this individual. Those things were kicking in. I'm assuming for someone who literally goes over the edge, your brain now is not processing anymore. And this is how we hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, like a child doing harm to someone. And now you hear about them in jail or something's going on because they literally have fallen over the cliff and they can't take this anymore. Where you're processing this.
I was processing it a lot because, again, you got to remember who I was. Mm-hmm. Starting at 2, I was the responsible person.
Exactly.
Right? So even at 5 years old, 7 years old, 9 years old, I was the responsible person. Mm-hmm. So that means you carry every possible action to its potential conclusion in your mind, and you turn over all of these possible outcomes over and over and over. I mean, like, even now, even though I realize now that that was over processing at that time, I have to catch myself now over processing things beyond their potential conclusion. Like, because you can't know everything.
Exactly.
But in all honesty, I have always been very, very against having to say I'm sorry. I never wanted to have to say I'm sorry because I feel like, again, this is potentially from the way that I had to process other people apologizing, is because you just didn't do enough. That's why you have to apologize, because you didn't fix it, you didn't see it, you didn't catch it soon enough. All of those things, right? That's why you have to apologize, and not wanting to be in the position where good works were evil spoken of.
Gotcha.
Right. So there was a lot of religious entanglement in my upbringing, a lot. And a lot of things that I have since had to distangle, had to, figure out what's the truth, what was the intention, what was the spirit of that law, what was really meant by this thing. But nevertheless, I left, and when I ran away because I wanted to protect the people that I loved, and I wanted to save myself from where I was. And so then when it came to the place where my grandmother was in need of care, she was in need of more care. That was one of the conditions of me returning, although it was a very short period of time, is whenever I'm here, he can never be here. He can never be here. I don't even want to see like a semblance of his existence in the space whenever I'm here. And I don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me, but I got to get a few dollars so that I can give it to such and such. Honey, please do not bring to me anything that has to do with this individual, because I am trying, again, as much as lies within me, to live peaceably in these circumstances.
Because you are helping
my grandmother now.
Okay. So 2 questions. You left your sister behind. How did that make you feel? Or did you guys go to the same home?
No. Yeah, we went to the same home, and I left my sister behind. At that point, my sister had an independent sort of entity. We were siblings. We were in the same home, but we had already started sort of living our lives separately.
Gotcha.
By that point. And I don't think I knew how or what I could do. At that point, I was only doing as much as I could to get out of there and just to not deal with this anymore.
Gotcha. At 13, Lisa, where did you go?
I went everywhere. So at 13, I went everywhere. I went to the street. I went to friends' houses. I went to couches. I went with guys. I went with women. I went anywhere. And interestingly enough, I stayed in school. While going through all these things and having sex and running the streets and doing everything. I finally got a job at around 13 and a half at Burger King so that I could help pay the rent at the place with a friend of mine who at least I felt safe with. She and I were sort of running away together and had a place to stay. So while I was in school and working full time from 4 p.m. to midnight at Burger King,
What? Okay. All right. And man, this is okay. You know why it's surprising for me and my jaws are dropping, even though our listeners can't see? It's because 13, my daughter's 14. I cannot even fathom.
That was what began to heal me, to be quite honest, was seeing my own children and the children in my care and realizing I wouldn't expect them to do A, B, and C. I wouldn't expect them to do C, D, and E. But my mother wasn't even 12 years old when she had me.
She was
so
young.
Understand that anger and that resentment and that, like, where is somebody to take care of me? You don't know who it is until you realize who it is. Like at that time, she was always a mom in my mind. Not realizing she was a 13-year-old mom. She was, she was a 14-year-old mom. She was a 12-year-old mom. Those numbers didn't click until I'm 30. Now looking at my own, or 35, actually I had my son at 27, but so at the age when I'm seeing him and his friends at 12 and 13, I'm saying, how the hell could you expect somebody this age to have the intellectual tenacity, to have the wherewithal without a help system, because she didn't have a system in place, right? To be able to successfully take care of anybody, barely themselves. Because up to that point, all I'm seeing is you can do it because you're doing it, right? I'm taking care of myself at 12, at 13, at 14, at 15, and then at 16. Right, wrong, or indifferent, good, bad, or whatever, I still see myself as doing it. As a matter of fact, I wanted to create a family of my own, which didn't happen until much later on, simply to prove that it could have been done better than was done. Right?
Interesting.
So that healing came after those realizations set in. But again, that comes back to whose story are you listening to? When I listen to my own story, when I listen to her story, when I listen to their story, none of it makes sense until I first make sense of my story, which is why it's so important to me to help women to get the clarity that they need from their historical accounts of life, because they are oftentimes much more powerful than they think they are.
Absolutely.
They have so much more ability and tenacity than they may have been led to believe, because someone else was telling their story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My gosh. And when you told me your mother was a young mother, I immediately went to like 15, 16. I didn't realize she was 12 years old when you were born. So there's possibly she had just turned 12 conceiving you. Do you know who your father is? And is he way older?
He's not way older, but he was older. And I did not know who he was until after he passed, which is why I carry his name now. Santiago is actually my father's last name that I took as an adult.
Okay.
So he wasn't way older, but he was a bit older. I think about 4 or 5 years older than my mother, but still older enough that he could have suffered ramifications for being my father at that time.
Yeah. You're a mother. I'm a mother. Just for the moment right now, picture your child at 11 years old, entering 12. My kid was, the nicest word I can find was just stupid and innocent, both put together. I can't even imagine a girl being pregnant. I mean, I know what happens after we get our period. We are able to conceive. I get it. But when I was 12 years old, when I got my period, I was dumb. My daughter, she's an intelligent, smart girl, but being able to handle a child, no, she can't do that all alone.
And even in that still comes from different perspectives. By the time I was 13, I was an adult. In my mind, I was a full-blown adult. By the time I had my period at about 10 and a half, I was in my own mind old enough to make decisions and have relationships by the time I was 12 and a half to 13 years old. And a lot of that came from the independent nature wherewith I had to operate up to that point. And I'm sure that my mom had some of those similar circumstances with her as well. And so because of that, the reality of it is that it wasn't necessarily a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, or whatever in all elements. Of course, there are some scientific studies, psychologists talk about the forming of the brain and the shaping of the brain and all these other things, but I'm not sure whether or not they take things like trauma into consideration. I'm not sure that they take things like survival into consideration, because when you have been a survivor from the time that you are 2 or 3 years old, and then to be 9 or 10 years old, 11 or 12 years old, is a bit different type of independence. It's a bit different. And it's so funny that even as I think about my peers from the elementary school that I graduated from, many of us, the ones of us that stayed in touch, we had the same experience. We went from childhood to adulthood in our 8th grade year.
Quickly.
It was like we didn't go into teen, this whole Breakfast Club, teen foolishness, all those. We didn't have that, period. We were kids and finally adults.
Yeah.
And that was the transition, which is why during my health and wellness transition, I realized that around 35, 40, that some of the behaviors that I was exhibiting at that time were based upon a missing teenage life. Mm-hmm. So going back and wanting to experience some of those milestones, if you will, some of those freedoms, some of those lifestyles, or whatever the case might be, was because we all have there's a natural evolution process that we go through. Babies, toddlers, elementary school, teen, preteen, teen, young adult, and those things. But sometimes when life has taken you on this obstacle course of a journey that you had to skip over some of these milestone periods, whether it's because you had to take care of a parent, because you had to take care of a sibling, you had to take care of a grandparent, whatever those things may come, they're not all bad. But inevitably, we get to return to a time that we missed because we crave it for some reason. And it's just about having the right guidance and the right leverage to navigate through it. When I was going through that awakening season that actually required some regression before progression, I had an amazing guide with me. And she helped me to respectfully take that process through some of the elders in my life who I respected, who could have been very, very hurt as a result of some of my behaviors and some of my acting out, if you will. If a 35, 40-year-old person can act out,
Oh, we can.
But you can.
You can. Yes, you definitely can.
But because of the knowledge that she had, I was able to prepare both myself and those that I loved enough to want to be respectful through this process, to say, listen, I don't know what this is going to be, and it might not be pretty, but I need it for me. So I'm going to need you to keep some distance so that you don't catch shrapnel. And I'm saying, just be there. If you can't handle it, close the windows. If you don't know how it's going to end, pray.
Exactly.
But I have to go through this. And this is my time.
Yeah, it is. And it is your time.
And now I get to help women to go through that.
Exactly. And that's the good thing. And it is your time. And I'm going to tell you, during your healing process and during that journey, there are certain doors sometimes that have to be closed, or there are certain people in your life that's not going to understand what you're going through. And if that means that you need to leave them over there, I'm going to love you from a distance, because my healing, my peace, my sanity is important to me. The road I'm going down is not healthy, and I got to change the course and relearn things and dislearn things that I have learned. You being forced to grow up at such a young age, you and many other people being forced to become an adult at a very young age, not being able, a care-hearted, free child, just like you said, going through the things you need to go through. What a 10-year-old and what an 11-year-old, what a 12-year-old do. No, Lisa, you are already in the mind of like 18, 19-year-old at 10, 11, 12, if not even older.
There was a lot.
That was definitely a lot. So now, as we fast forward, you ran away from home. You went through all that stuff. You briefly had to come back to care for your grandmom. And you did set those limitations in place, so you did not have to see those individual. Did you leave? Did something happen to your grandma that caused you to leave because you came back to help her? Now, did she pass away within that short period of time?
Yeah.
Okay, so after she passed, now you left again. Okay, so is this when you started to make changes in your life?
So before she actually passed away, she got, well, obviously a lot older, and she had to be cared for more than I could care for her. So we were able to put her in a nursing home.
Okay.
And so because of that, I didn't have to see him. I had, she was taken care of. I didn't have to see him. And by that point, I was out. I was on my own. I had dropped out of high school by this point. At 16, in the 10th grade, I dropped out because calculus doesn't get you any more money at Burger King. I don't care how many calculus classes or how many A's you get. And so I was fed up with learning stuff that didn't make me money.
Gotcha.
And so I went to apply for business school at a business school that the only requirement that they had, because remember, I didn't have a high school diploma, was an entrance exam. So I took the entrance exam for them, and I passed the entrance exam, and I went ahead and took those business administration and computers, those classes in that school, and completed that. All the while just leveraging that information. You would think getting myself on the right track, but I wasn't. I was just learning how to be a better criminal at that time.
What do you mean by a better criminal? Hold up. What were you doing that was criminal? You were like trying to survive, Lisa. You were working at Burger King.
Yes, honey. Trying to survive working at Burger King, only to find out that Burger King is like not paying enough to sustain. Yeah. So you're hustling on the side, and you know what? You're selling yourself for comfort, selling yourself for companionship, and selling yourself for money.
So you did right? that for a brief period of time.
Of course.
And how did that,
course.
how does that transition? And I'm asking because I am one, I was talking to someone about this the other day. She was, she wasn't, what did you call yourself at that time? What's just
a survivor.
A survivor. So when you're in that situation.
Yeah, because I wasn't a streetwalker. I wasn't a prostitute. These were situations that I would get myself into to survive.
Oh.
Whether it was an older man who wanted the companionship, whether it was a doughboy who wanted somebody to count whatever, you know.
I see. Okay.
It was survivorship.
I see. Okay.
Not that I have anything against if a woman's life took her down, prostitution took her down, streetwalking or whatever, that's what she had to do to survive. But I only make the clarification to let people know that there are more ways to sell yourself than to just standing on the corner. Selling
and
yourself.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And I'm glad you clarified that, because it was a situational type of situation. Like you said, you were trying to survive. So when you saw that money present itself, that's why you use the word criminal, and they needed something done. Okay, I got you. Let's go.
Yes. And that was in the sexual element, because it went other ways as well. Again, I went to business school, and I went to computer school. So I learned how to do things with computers. I learned how to create documents. I learned how to do a lot of things, and they were not always leveraged above board. Mm-hmm. They were not always, sitting in somebody's office somewhere. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you were in the back room somewhere. Sometimes you were typing up a document for somebody. The thing is, it was about survival. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe people are just not telling the story anymore, but I know that I was not alone in this lifestyle of just having to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not ashamed of it. And it also, it helped me to survive, but it also led me to accumulate some habits that were not in my best interest, mm-hmm. like using drugs, using cocaine. I was an active cokehead for probably 11 years.
That's a long time, Lisa.
And yeah, it was a long time, and still kept the job and still paid my bills and still, because that was my way of escape.
Gotcha.
Cocaine was escaping. It was a happy high. Mm-hmm. It was a fun high. Mm-hmm. Everything is great. You can do anything in that high. Mm-hmm. Which is why when people say you want to smoke weed, no, honey, I have enough depressed down stuff in my head. I do not need that.
I've experienced enough.
Yeah, no, thank you. But then with just feeling like life was on a hamster wheel, if you will, Shirley, like mm-hmm. just getting by, consistently just getting by. I was around 25, and just feeling like, you know what, this is just getting by. This is so much just getting by. Around 25, 26, I decided, you know what, I'm going to leave. I'm sick of this just getting by. New York is where I grew up, where I'm originally from. And I felt like I'm paying rent for an apartment I never see. I have a car that I didn't have a car yet, but I had a garage that I got to pay for that I never put a car in because I don't have a car. It's cold and I don't like the cold. And I just said, you know what, the world has got to be better somewhere else. Okay. So I just decided, you know what, I want to be somewhere else. I put up a map of the Southeast. I threw a dart and ended in North Carolina. I stole everything I could steal. I took everything I could take. I packed it up in a U-Haul and I drove to North Carolina to start over into a new life, into a new opportunity to leave it all behind. Like just thinking to myself, if I could have a fresh start, I don't have to do the same things that I did while I was there. And while I'm on the road to North Carolina, I'm talking to myself. I'm getting high, mind you. I'm still getting high. And all of a sudden, I'm talking to God, and all of a sudden he says, so you're going to take the old you on your new journey. And it was like, wow. It was almost overwhelming.
It made you think.
Yeah. It made me think. It made me stop. It made me hear. Like a lot of people talk about when they got saved and their salvation and all those things. I knew God all my life. I knew God before I had any introduction to him. I knew him. I felt him. I heard him. We talked in the most inopportune moments, but this was the moment that I heard him. Now, I heard him before. I heard him talking to her, but this was the moment that I heard him resonate. And I call that my road to Damascus experience. Because in that moment, with the container full of Coke, I folded it up and I said, I don't do this anymore. That's not who I am. And started this journey to this new life with a new mindset of starting a new beginning. And it was like the whole world was possible.
It makes you emotional now.
Everything was possible. Yeah, because I'm grateful that I didn't listen to people, and I hear them even now say, God doesn't hear a sinner's prayer. And I hear people when they say that you have to put everything aside to talk to God. And I'm grateful that he didn't wait for me to get right. He got me right.
He sure did. He sure did.
You know?
He sure did.
He got me right. And I didn't have to assume the right position. And I didn't have to choose the right religion. And I didn't have to, accept the right words. I just had to hear him talking. And I did hear him. And I'm grateful to that. I'm grateful forever in my life for that moment that happened. At that moment, I put the drugs down. Thank God I haven't picked them up yet. My son is now 25. That was a year before he was born. So I'm grateful that a lot prepared the road, for things to come. And have not looked back, have not fallen down that road again. And I'm grateful. So I showed up in North Carolina. The things that I had planned fell through when I first got here. So I thought that I thought that I was going to be staying with an old friend until I got on my feet. And that didn't work out. I ended up at a place called the Charlotte Area Fund, which to this day, I thank them. I've actually worked with them since pulling my life together and turning around. I've actually worked with them to work with their constituents as well. Got an apartment, got a job within 3 days of arriving in North
That's a
Carolina.
blessing. And you know, God is always with us. Now,
Yeah,
we
he
all have
is.
different believers and we all may have a different name for what it is that we worship.
Yes.
But
And I respect
yeah,
that.
I do as well. But regardless, he's always with us, even on in your down moments, because I know there are times where we may want to question like the why me
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, God, when can I get removed from this situation? Everybody else is doing great in their life and look at me. But he is always there. But it's a matter of, I had to tell myself, like, you know how as parents we're blessed with children, we are their guide for a brief period of their life. And then after that, even when they're young, we're guiding them. We can't always hold their hand to lead them down that path.
Right.
And that's the same situation. That's the same situation as adults. God cannot literally hold our hand and say, okay, Lisa, this is what we're going to do next. We literally, at times, I had to tell myself, I do have to fall flat on my face because this is him still talking to me, letting me know that no, you can't go down that path. Now, regardless if I choose to listen to him or not, that's my own choice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But
Right.
I mean, that is phenomenal that at that point in time, you took that drive and you was able to go down there, get to North Carolina. You got a job within 3 days. Within a year of you being there, motherhood kicked in. And I know this is positive things just started happening, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of positive things started happening. That's not to say that there were not any still challenges, because there were a series of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
The even on the road to Charlotte, I brought with me my partner from my
Mm-hmm.
life, my lifestyle at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And although we were not suitably matched, we still clung to each other out of certain fears that we both
Mm-hmm.
emanated. You know, we both had some challenges that we went through in our lives that caused us, the saying, water seeks its own level.
Exactly.
And so there were some things in that. When we stayed together, we got married once we got here, and we stayed together for almost 20 years. And that wasn't the most healthy decision for either one of
Gotcha.
us. And I'm grateful that finally the freedom of forgiveness, the freedom of
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness, allowed us to release one another from a bondage that was not intended to hold us together. And so we got a divorce, and that freed me up to finally remarry. I've been married now for 5.5
Mm-hmm.
years to my purpose partner, the one who I'm supposed to spend and share my life with. But neither one of us would be who we were if it were not for our past, for
Exactly.
our, circumstances. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for life's experiences. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from them. And I'm grateful for the wisdom now that came from those things, to understand the message from the
The
mess.
message from the mess. And I like how you said my purpose partner, because I don't like soulmate or my better half. I don't necessarily care for those terms, but I like my purpose partner because that makes a lot more sense. My purpose partner. And you said it when you were speaking, embracing your past in a positive way, because you would not be the Lisa Santiago McNeil that you are today
Mhm.
if it wasn't for those experiences you went through and that journey that you went down.
Absolutely.
So where you are now, you are a serial entrepreneur, a businesswoman, 6 figures. When would you say, how many years now would you say that you have been in the place that you are now? What was the, who, well, two questions to that. I know I'm always plumping somebody up with questions. And what was the first company that you started?
So the first company that I started was A Road to Success for You.
Okay.
A Road to Success for You was, I don't really think we really knew what it was. We knew what we wanted to be doing. We wanted to be helping people. I've always known what my purpose was. I didn't always know what my calling was. And A Road to Success for You started out as a mentorship program for children who were having challenges in school. That's what we started it out as. Myself and my partner, she and I worked together to build this mentorship program. And what we would do is we would go into the school system to find out how we could help with children who were in need of support, like they had parents that were absent. They weren't coming to any of the teachers' meetings and all these other things, but they were having challenges in school, but nobody was able to get in touch with the mom properly and make those conversations and communications. So we ended up as a proxy. So what we would do is we would go to the school, meet the parent with the permission, meet the teacher with the permission of the parent. We were there as the parent's proxy.
Oh, okay.
Right? So we were there as the parent's proxy, and then we would take that information home to the parent and we would explain to them what happened. Either the mom or the dad, but it was mostly moms. They couldn't get to school. They didn't have transportation. They didn't have time off from work. Whatever those challenges were, they were having issues. And for example, little Johnny was having issues. He's bouncing around in school. He's beating people up. He's doing whatever. And the challenge was the teacher is not getting any communication from the house. So now how do we get this handled? So we would first reach out to the mom and say, listen, I know you got to work or whatever. We'll go in and we'll tell you what's going on. Then we'll go to the teacher and we would do the same.
Gotcha.
We'll take that information back to the parent. We realized without a relationship with the parent, it was going to be difficult to have any type of a liaison relationship with the parent and the teacher. And it was met with truculence and consternation. Everybody was on the edge of their defense. Like, what did he do now? Or he's always getting in trouble anyway. Everybody was blaming little Johnny. And none of it was ever little Johnny's fault.
Exactly.
What we found was it was more the house that he had to live in, or the lack of the modeling that was happening. And even in that, please hear me when I say this is not us pointing the finger at mom. This was us realizing that mom needed support in order to support Johnny.
Exactly.
And so with the Road to Success for You, what we ended up doing was we found out more often than not that when we came in and we pointed out and bolstered up mom, her son or her daughter could see her beaming and taking pride in something. And then we helped them to develop activities that the mother and son or mother and daughter or families could do together. The family could take pride in something, whether it was making floral arrangements was one of the first businesses that we helped start. Baking cookies was another business that we helped start. And so these little small projects that seem, inconsequential, when you walk into someone's home, you can find something that they take pride in. And if you can focus on that thing that they take pride in, you can usually find their calling in that. Exactly. So when we were walking home and it smelled delicious, or we walk in a home and we see a beautiful display of pictures or pottery or paintings or whatever, it was this little area, it might not be any bigger than a table, that we could see this is what brings mom joy. And if we could show her how to take her joy and turn it into money, that we could help her to find purpose, help her to find a place of purpose. What empowerment means to me is economic independence. A lot of times mothers were working 2 and 3 jobs because they had to make that money.
Exactly.
and they didn't see any other way to do it. So with Road to Success for You, we showed them how to turn their gifts and talents into extra income. We showed them how to properly structure them so that they could create exemptions and deductions for their business portfolios, for their money. So that we showed them how they could pay their children. We showed them how that they could use this to bring themselves together with their children and therefore inspire their sons and daughters to want something more out of life, to want something more. And so that's where the empowerment journey started.
That's good. Okay, so now how many companies cultivated from that? Because what possessed you to start that? Because you were doing more for the parents. And I've never heard of anything like this before, of, this organization stepping in. There were times, even if not looking at it from a negative perspective, this would have been great even now for many families when you can't make back to school night or something,
Yeah.
That I'm looking as like a little positive.
It is. It really was. And we have some great people that have stuck behind and that are still doing that. They're still fulfilling those roles in Road to Success for You. There are several organizations that we've found that were doing similar work, but that were not getting the necessary recognition, and there was not enough awareness to it. But there were a lot of issues with continuing it for me, because in the beginning of the Road to Success for You, I had the benefit of only doing it without any overhead. There was no overhead. I was not a stay-at-home mom, but a work-from-home mom. So I had a lot of freedom from my job, and I could travel, and I could set my own time. I had a car. I had a good salary. I had all of those things. And so I was able to do this as a unofficial nonprofit.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. All right. So now, where are you at today? Are you still running that company?
No.
Why did you stop? Why did you not progress it, or the season for that was over?
Yeah, the season for that was over for me. Like I said, my son is now 25. I didn't have a lot of interactions with children that age. So that was approximately 10 years ago. And that season was over. But those women who we had supported into entrepreneurship were then becoming in the need of guidance.
Got it.
Right. And so that's where the Women Empowerment Networks came from. Women Empowerment Networks is a sisterhood for personal, professional, and spiritual networking that helps women to be able to be supported either in business or in life with a spiritual sub-focus.
Got it. Okay.
And so that's where I evolved to with Women Empowerment Networks, and then finally to Empowerment Publishing and Multimedia with I Am Lisa Santiago Coaching and Consulting, because I was able to help these women to now see what they have and show them how to further implement their ideas, their businesses, their thoughts, and their dreams into becoming truly empowered with economic independence, so they could decide where I live, who I stay with, and what I do, not only based upon what this job is paying me or what this man is willing to pay, but based upon what my own unique subset of skills, gifts, and talents are now able to do.
Exactly. Okay. So my question for you is, what would a woman come to Lisa for to receive coaching?
Initially, they come to me for clarity. They come to me for clarity. Usually the women that I work with are right around 40 years old. They have been dedicating their lives to surviving, to helping others to survive. And they're at a place, oftentimes maybe on the verge of empty nesting, and they're now wanting to see what they can do just for them. What am I here for? What am I supposed to be doing? And helping them to identify that clarity. What were you purposed for? Helping them to find their calling, which is very different from your purpose. Helping them to identify what that calling is, and then showing them how to take that calling and implement it as a business is more often than not what women come to me for. In those processes, we end up doing journaling and life inventory. And a lot of times that's what leads them to writing their own autobiographical story, or their own self-help story, or their own how-to story. Because so often as women, when you've gotten to 35, 40, 45 years old, you've figured some things out.
Exactly.
And many of the women that come to me now want to be the help that they wish they had. And so we help them to define what that looks like. We help them to shape what their story actually means, what types of coaching they could give to someone else, what types of courses and classes and workshops they could give from their perspective, from their level of expertise, to help someone else to overcome what they could be going through.
Exactly. Now, my question for you is, what word of empowerment would you have to offer based on everything that you went through from childhood to now, to someone out there who's listening, who's either in the same situation that you were in from your childhood to your young teens to adolescents, to help them keep their focus so they can find their triumph, their purpose, their calling in life? Because we all have a purpose, but their calling, because that
Absolutely.
tragedy that they're in right now, they cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. So to find your calling, it really is 5 pieces of that puzzle in my mind. To find your calling, you have to notice what continues to come to you. Because I honestly believe that God fits the burden to the back. That God does not allow any more than what we can handle. Even though we think like, oh my God, for years I used to say, well, God, you must have my address mixed up with somebody because this is too much. I can't handle it. But honestly, He knows what you can do better than you know yourself. So the first thing I want you to do is to first realize that you are capable, more capable than you have given yourself credit for. The second thing is to take life inventory. When we are feeling at our lowest and our worst, we often begin to think about the things that we might consider failures. I want you to look at your past differently. I want you to look at the things that you succeeded against that should have taken you out. If you think about that moment that everything came upon you, that worst moment of your life, and allow yourself to see it, allow yourself to feel it, allow yourself to remember it, and then open your eyes and realize that it's behind you. All of your worst times in your life are behind you. Then taking your journal, and if you're not journaling, I'm going to tell you, journaling is so cathartic. And it is especially useful in finding that strong inner impulse that pulls you towards a particular course of action, especially when it's accompanied by the conviction of divine influence. That journal is a guide. But oftentimes when we're journaling, we're only writing what's bad. And as soon as things lighten up, that journal goes back in the drawer to the bedside table, and we forget to put how we came out of it. We forget to put what we've overcome in there. And so it becomes a dip into the doldrums instead of a celebration of everything you've accomplished. Yeah. So journal successfully, consistently and successfully, and then hold those findings against your values and your belief system. The things that you see and you notice, hold them against your values or belief systems. One of two things is going to happen. One is you're going to find that your values or your belief system substantiates them, or you're going to find that there are some things in your belief system that are limiting. There are some things in your belief system that are lies that were taught to you by someone who was unqualified to speak in your life. Mm-hmm. And then surround yourself with people of love, light, and authority, and ask them to help you to navigate through what you found so that you can put yourself on the right course. We cannot do this on our own.
Absolutely.
We cannot do this on our own. And that is the one thing, that's like the biggest thing that I can think of, is that we are here to serve one another. Mm-hmm. And in our destiny to serve one another, we've got to be willing to ask for help and accept help more often.
Absolutely. And I wanted to add, even with the journaling, one good technique that was offered to me was, some people may not like to write. Taking that pen to paper from your mind is hard. Even audio journaling is also okay to do, listeners. You know, if writing is maybe not your cup of tea and it's a little harder for you, just speaking into, you know, there are options on the phone readily available right there, and saving it. But journaling is definitely a good thing. And you're right, because what we do is, as soon as our life starts to take that shift, we feel as though, okay, I could put you away. I don't need to document this anymore because I am now on a good path. But we need to visualize this and see how that transition took place. Oh my gosh, look at what happened. Look how I went from this person to this person, and look at the transition. I'm either seeing it here in this book where I wrote all my documentation, or all in your audio that you have done. So do not give excuses about, I don't want to write it down. This is too, you could talk into it. If you're a talker and that comes easier for you, you could do that, because I like journaling, but I like to do it in audio. I don't know why. I like writing, but sometimes there are days I just want to talk into my phone. All right. So, Lisa, I so much appreciate you having you as a guest. Your story is phenomenal. You had to grow up so quickly. And and like you said, everyone is different. Every person's situation is different. Every child is different. And what I realize is everyone is who they are based on the childhood that they had. You are the person that you are based on your childhood. And I'm not talking about, I'm not trying to say you are your tragedy, but your tragedy is your story. But it shaped you to the Lisa that you are today. And without that experience that you had went through, would you be where you are today? Would you be in a 6-figure company? Who knows? We don't know. And also you embracing that. Because some people will not embrace their past. Even still to this day, you may ask them something about my past and they say, that's my past. I don't want to talk about it. But the past is what is shaping you to who you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So, Lisa, thank you so much for being a guest. All her information will be available on the website to be able to reach out to her. And as always, listeners, I always end with saying, love yourself, voice yourself, and be yourself. Thank you for listening, and have a great one. Thanks for tuning in to Fanpale Podcast. If you want to continue the conversation or share your takeaways, I want to hear from you. Head on over to the website or join our Facebook community and comment your favorite part of the show or share your thoughts. I want to hear what you have to say. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Chat with you next week.